If you think about what lies really are fundamentally an attempt at revising history in order to push a narrative. And when you can push that narrative, really what you begin to do is you begin to control the way people think. And if you can control the way people think, you control the way they live. And I think effectively what that's done is that it's created a culture of death, which is preceded by a culture of consumerism.
But no, it's like that seems bigoted, that seems harsh, that doesn't seem equitable. And if you're a Christian and you have any sort of conservative leanings, to be in that sort of environment is really like soul sucking.
If you really want liberty from sin, if you really want to live a life of true meaning and purpose, if you really want to live the way God defines living, then the answer is in Him and in Him alone. And therefore you must trust Him. You must believe in Him. You must believe in who He is and what He has done in His redemptive work in order for you to have any of that.
You're listening to the Great Reassessment Podcast. Are you stacking Bitcoin but still no friends? It's time to download Club Orange, the home base for true Bitcoiners. With Club Orange, you can ditch the noise, the lonely doom scrolling, and join a real in-person community built for people who actually get it. You can enjoy time spent with local Bitcoiners who believe in the same sound money principles as you do. I've been using it for almost 2 years. I've been able to attend over 24 local meetups, and I've created lifelong friendships. Download Club Orange today and get connected. Are you tired of eating fiat food? Get your beef and pork today from Acme Acres in Spirit Lake, Idaho, where every cow is grass-fed, vaccine-free, and raised the way nature intended. My buddy Jason Hanley, he runs the place, and yeah, they even accept Bitcoin. Guys, I eat this meat, I feed it to my kids. It's amazing. You gotta try it. It's pure beef, no nonsense, shipped nationwide. Visit acmeacres.us today and taste what sound money should taste like. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Great Reassessment. I'm here today with Lennox Kalifungwa. Lennox, thanks for being here.
It's so great to be here, Matthew. Thank you for the invitation. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. First question, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Well, of course, Lennox Kalifungwa. I live in Moscow, Idaho, and work with New St. Andrews College, helping push some of their digital content. I'm the host of two shows. One is called Flames and Crowns, which focuses on culture, and the other is Kings and Statesmen, which focuses on politics. Other than that, I'm a writer and like to write on Substack. I also write for the NSA blog. Yeah, that certainly keeps me busy. Husband, father, so those are the jobs I love best. And yeah, so that's in a nutshell who I am.
Yeah, how many kids do you have?
3 kids, a 4th on the way.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So one question I like to ask people on this podcast is, what have you been meditating on lately as it kind of pertains to what you do, the things you're interested in? What have you been meditating on?
That's an excellent question. What have I been meditating on? I think one of the things that's been going through my mind for much of this week is our sense of history and finding our identity in what we believe to be true about the past. There's a sense in which, God's enemies are so intent on skewing our idea of what history is and weaving it with all kinds of narratives that are contrary to reality. And I think that's because we don't live in a time vacuum of sorts, like we're always living in relation to the past in a sense. We live and stand on the back of people who've gone before us. And that's why it's so important for us to learn history the right way and recognize failures in history so that we don't repeat them, but also learn from successes in history so that we can emulate them. And I think that's just so important. And I think we live in a world now where there's so much distraction. There's so much vying for our attention. There's so much purporting itself to be truth when it's in fact a falsehood. And we no longer have the faculties to discern the truth in that sense. And so I think we're in a moment where access to information comes at a time where there's rampant miseducation. And we need to correct that by actually pursuing truth, beauty, and goodness in the way that God has ordained, in the way that He perceives it. And I think that's the only way we're going to be able to start to remedy some of what we're seeing around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, I think there's a war for the history books. And if you think about what lies really are fundamentally an attempt at revising history in order to push a narrative. That's really all it is. It's that old serpentine lie. Did God really say? Right. And that's an attempt to really skew history. And so I think we need to be a people who, one, just need to learn to pause, need to learn to stop getting lost in the noise and actually learn what true history is, and not just history and the general things. I think just history about our own lives, our own families, and the things that really have made an influence or make an influence on who we perceive ourselves to be. So yeah, anyway, that's just, that's one of
No,
those things
thanks. I mean,
really
that's really insightful. When you said that every lie is an attempt to skew history, just my gut instinct agrees with you, because if you look at like a child, right? When a child lies about, hey, did you eat that cookie? Right? It's in the past. What
Yes.
took place, the truth is in the past. And whether he or she tells you the truth or lies, well, if he or she lies, it's like you're trying to
Yeah,
alter what actually happened. And
that's
when you
exactly
said
it.
that, it kind of reminded me of that famous line out of the book 1984, where he says, whoever controls the past controls the future.
Yeah,
Whoever
that's
controls
exactly it.
the present controls the
Yeah.
past. And so I do think there's a lot of power when you can control a narrative of history, because it changes the trajectory you're going on forward, right?
Right.
But why else do you think people today, and when I say people, I mean powerful leaders, politicians, the engines of social production like Hollywood, why do you think they want to control the past? Like, what are their goals?
Yeah, I think it really is an attempt on them to control how life or how they believe life should be lived. This is their attempt to control institutions, to control the future of institutions. And I think that's why they're so hell-bent on revising history that way and really pushing a narrative. I think there's also a sense in which, yes, that there's a very strategic effort in doing so. I mean, I think about a book written in the late 80s, titled After the Ball. And it was written by, I'm trying to remember their names now. I think Kirk and Madsen are their names. And basically the subtitle of the book is, okay, I'm going to butcher this, but essentially it's on how homosexuality was going to be pushed in America. And this was written in the late 80s. And they gave this very specific strategy of how they were going to achieve that. I think the first phase is desensitization, which is basically trying to flood media with all kinds of images of compelling homosexual characters. And as people engage with that kind of content, they eventually begin to get used to it. So they no longer have this repulsive and immediate reaction to it. They get used to it. Then the next phase is jamming, which is essentially, I think, an effort at shaming those who would resist the current narrative, and also trying to make associations, well, still using shame, but to sort of paint a picture that those who oppose this really are just bigots. So for example, in jamming, you kind of see this in media where the person who's against homosexuality is usually the preacher standing behind a podium and he's banging his fists and he looks deranged and crazy. And that's meant to paint this picture that, you see, it's the church that's actually like they're homophobic and they're the ones who are being oppressive. And so that's a very intentional tactic to silence people who would resist any sort of nonsense or chaos. And the last phase is conversion. And I think there's two sides to conversion. One side is just people being silent because they know they don't want to get into trouble. And that's actually a form of conversion. Or it's just people even kind of championing the cause of homosexuality. And the vehicle through which they wanted to push this sort of propaganda was media. And we see this in Hollywood. Now, whenever you see a character in an ordinary Netflix movie, it's always the gay guys who are the most compelling. They're the smartest. They're the best dressed. They're the wittiest. And that's very intentional. And you see jamming, you see how people have been converted by all of that. And I think that's their effort to push a very specific narrative. And when you can push that narrative, really what you begin to do is you begin to control the way people think. And if you can control the way people think, you control the way they live. And that has political ramifications, that has economic ramifications, that has academic ramifications. That's literally how you begin to control society. Now, I mean, like with all that said, like again, like there's this very intentional strategy to push all this. And yet I just can't conceive of how people who think this way necessarily have this long play in mind. You know, like there's a sense in which those who buy into the dogmas of secularism, those who've bought into Marxism, sure, they might talk about this utopia. But when you hear what that utopia really is, it sounds like a civilization that is rife with all kinds of chaos and death, right? Like there's no long term to this. There's a sense in which secularism is eating itself. Secularism, for example, one of the tenets of it is it's very fatalistic. And because of that, there's this war against fertility, which is why people aren't having kids. And when you don't have kids, really, like your shelf life as far as civilization goes is very short. It's very limited. You'll be gone within a generation or two. And so I think that that's also part of the propaganda. I think at the root of this is an attempt to sow a self-loathing culture that effectively destroys itself. And I think that's why they try so hard and why we're bombarded with all kinds of content that, one, just unhinges us from everything that's true. It unhinges us from everything that's right. It unhinges us from history. It makes us think that this present moment is all there is and all there will be. And therefore we have to do our bit to sort of survive in this present moment, which is also a very Darwinian idea. All right. It's that idea that life is all about survival. And so just do what it takes to survive and enjoy yourself now. Tomorrow doesn't really matter. The past definitely doesn't matter. And just live your life now. Live according to how you feel now, you know? So
Yeah. That when you talk about like the hyperfixation on the present,
right.
that is, I think everybody kind of struggles. That's like a fight like everybody's up against, right? But like
Sure.
within
Yes.
secularism, that is like they don't want to have kids. They don't care about the past. So you are sort of stuck in this present moment. And something that I've been thinking about lately is like when you only focus on the present, you don't take time to build things that last. And so there's nothing, and really, if you don't take time, like look at everything that's true, good, and beautiful, it takes time to build.
Yes.
And those are the things that are actually worth defending. Like if you've built something great, it's worth dying for. And I don't know if people today have enough things that are worth dying for.
Yeah.
And like you look at all the products, like all the furniture, all the IKEA things, like cheap stuff you get on Amazon, like we're just surrounded by things that don't last. And so I think Christians especially need to sort of have an awakening about like, man, we got to see what's going on here because we're going to fall prey to it too. Because if we don't have anything worth defending, I mean, yes, we have our families, and that's like obviously the top of the list, like in the physical present, we have our faith. But I just think about like being connected to something that's really worth defending, like a home that's been passed down through generations, family mementos that were built by hand and like were passed down. Like, and I think when you surround yourself with all those sorts of things, it changes who you are as a person because
Yes.
you are connected to the past. And then a lot, like same thing with having kids, like you have a direct stake in the future now, and it makes you just a safer person. I've said this before on a podcast. People who don't have a stake in the past and they don't have a stake in the future, they're a dangerous person because they have less to live for. And I think those are the people who are carrying out a lot of these acts of violence.
Yes.
So I don't know, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think as I hear you say that, one thing that comes to mind again is just this idea of identity. And really what I'm getting at is this idea of who we are and what we're for. And I think we live in a world where people don't know what that is. So I kind of alluded to Marxism earlier, and Marxism proposes this idea that we are people who are either oppressed or oppressive. Like life is a power play, effectively. And that's all we are. We're cogs in this machine vying for power. Darwinianism basically proposes the idea that we are evolved species of goo and gunk that are here to vie it out for power as well, and we're here to survive. And there's many other ideas alongside that as well. I mean, you think of postmodernism and it's like, well, we are all just here to live for whatever we want to live for and create our own truth. And I think effectively what that's done is that it's created a culture of death, which is preceded by a culture of consumerism. And so we think more about what we can get and what we can receive rather than what we can build and what we can multiply. And it's terrible when a society becomes consumerist in this sense. It has economic ramifications because then you have an economy where people are consuming more than they're producing, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that makes debt a real problem. That's the kind of stuff that really entrenches an enslaving welfare. That's the kind of stuff that guarantees impoverishment. And not just an impoverishment in a financial sense. I think even relationally, because we're cut off from everything that actually matters. We don't really build real relationships. I think the best kind of relationships are relationships that are sacrificial. I'm using the terminology of the Bible. The best kind of relationships are those in which people are seeking to outdo one another in love. But now we live in a world that's it's a self-seeking world. It's a world where everyone is looking out for themselves. It's a world where everyone is pursuing their own pleasure. It's a world that is cut off from everything that's actually life-giving. And I think this is what all amounts to. So even in our reckoning of history, I think a right reading of history, a right reckoning of history. Well, one, I think it actually has to begin with God. Otherwise, nothing else actually matters. But when we miss that, when we miss the origins of who we are and where we're from and what we're for, we won't know how to live. And then again, all we'll have is this present moment, at least in our minds, and just trying to, almost fatalistically enjoy this present moment. And so for as long as you're cut off from history, you're not going to have a strong sense of identity. You will end up loathing yourself. And that's exactly what we see. We see a world that actually loves death. And I think that's because they hate themselves and they hate other people. And that's why abortion is so rampant. That's why euthanasia is becoming a lot more popular. That's why in cities that are just degenerate, you see so much murder, and just violence. You see death all around you. And I think that's downstream from a culture that has learned to hate itself. And a culture that hates itself paralyzes itself, or it numbs the pain of that self-loathing with all kinds of illegitimate vice. And a big part of that is just consuming whatever gives them pleasure. That's what creates that culture of consumerism. And so anyway, as you were saying that's one of the things that came to mind, is a self-loathing culture will become a culture of consumerism, which will lead to a culture of death, inevitably.
That just kind of reminds me of some aspects of the book of, have you read Brave New World?
Yeah, well, I know of it.
Yeah.
At this point, I think I feel like I've read it because I'm always hearing it referenced. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty much that. It's a society has reached a place where you no longer have to deny yourself anything. And there's no point in enslaving anybody because people enslave themselves willingly, and there's no stake in the past. But there's actually, I don't want to spoil the book for you, but chapter 17 is my favorite chapter because you see these two clashing of worldviews, one from the new era, and one from the past. And so it's a really good book. It's one of my favorite reads. I want to read a tweet that you posted that I think is really interesting. And it says, so this is switching gears a little bit.
No problem.
Multiculturalism is problematic because it blasphemously claims that there can be other gods besides the true and living God. It assumes that antithetical religions can coexist, Multiculturalism is the application of religious pluralism. Many promote it in the name of peace and unity, but peace and unity will remain persistently elusive where truth is misdefined, relativized, and despised. Do you want to unpack a little bit about that?
Yes. So I suppose some of the context behind this was just thoughts. If you asked me last week what I was thinking about, I'd have probably told you that it was this specific thing. Just the correlation between culture and religion. I think we live in this world that on one hand doesn't always have a very accurate understanding of what culture is. For many people, culture is basically those elements that we're most sentimental about that are collectively practiced and agreed upon, right? Like I think that's generally what people think of when they think of culture. And people don't always think about how every single culture is governed by religion. Every single group of people worships something. I think it's one of the lies that secularism has taught us, is that neutrality is a real thing and that there's people who can live in this sort of neutral world where something is neither right, neither wrong. It's just in this little vacuum of neutrality. And many people think of culture as belonging in this neutral sort of place. But one, it's just that doesn't accord with reality. That's not what God has revealed in his word. We're always worshiping something. We're either slaves to righteousness or we're slaves to sin. No man can serve two masters, as Matthew 6 tells us. You'll either hate the one or love the other. We're always governed by something. We're always governed by what we worship. Culture is essentially the liturgy, the socially erected liturgy of religion. So in that sense, it flows downstream from religion. Culture being the values and the customs and the practices and the traditions of a group of people who have agreed to live in covenant with one another. All those elements, the values, the beliefs, the customs, the practices, all those things are things that are fundamentally influenced by religion. And so that's important for us to understand. So the best cultures in this world, and there are some cultures that are better than other cultures. We see that. Cultures that value and protect life, for example, are superior to cultures that sort of normalize death and murder. And that's just one example. Some cultures are better than others, but that's simply because some religions are better than others. So Christianity is the only true religion. It's the only religion, in fact, that has produced true freedom and true prosperity. And history has shown us this in many ways. The only societies that can ever be free and flourish are societies that are anchored in the truth. And that's necessary to understand as we think about things like culture. So now in relation to multiculturalism, I think there's this idea in the world, and it's been prevalent for some time, that, different cultures can somehow coexist. And the way one person lives next to the other person, that's just neutral stuff. That's more stuff to do with preference as opposed to a real fundamental difference. And what I'm arguing when I tweeted this out is that, again, you cannot divorce culture from religion. And so as we are promoting multiculturalism, what we're actually doing is promoting religious pluralism, where we actually think that there's multiple religions that can coexist. And I made a reference here indirectly to the first commandment of God's moral law, the command to have no other gods besides the true and living God. And so if you're a Christian, for example, and you believe that multiculturalism ought to be a thing, what you're actually doing is violating the first commandment of God's moral law, which, of course, it tells us that we ought to worship nothing else, no one else, apart from God, the true and living God. And so that's so important for us to understand, because, again, we live in this world where people really have bought into this idea of multiculturalism, and they do it in the name of peace and unity. And they're like, hey, multiculturalism, because we all just need to get along and hold hands and just have peace. And one, it just actually doesn't work that way. There can be no true peace. There can be no true unity unless people actually have a true religion. And having a true religion, they actually have a good culture that is truly free and that is truly prosperous. The irony as well is that those who push this idea of multiculturalism tend to live lives of great angst, and they're at war within themselves. It's the hot-haired liberals, for example, who will purport this idea, but they're the ones who are screaming death. They're the ones who vie for the murder of children in the womb. They're the ones who will take a bullet and kill a Charlie Kirk. They're the ones who are ultimately doing everything that is contrary to peace and contrary to unity. And I think that actually only reveals that multiculturalism can't exist. Or another example I can give is the spread of Islam in the West, which in many ways has become normalized, but now we're starting to see the consequences of that. So wherever Islam goes, you're going to see a degenerate culture. You're not going to see peace. You're not going to see unity. You're going to see violence. You are going to see rape. I mean, the statistics of rape, for example, in England by Muslims is appalling, right? But again, there's this idea that we can just all get along in the name of multiculturalism. And I think we miss that because we don't understand the religious underpinnings of culture. And so when I tweeted this out, what I'm really trying to shed light on is this correlation between culture and religion, and recognizing that religions that are antithetical to each other can never coexist. And therefore, cultures that are antithetical to each other can never coexist. So I think that's in a nutshell my thesis.
No, thanks for taking the time to explain that. I spent 1 year working in an elementary school, and this was 2022, and we received a large influx of refugees from Ukraine and Afghanistan. This was after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and so a lot of people from Afghanistan came to the United States, and we received a good chunk of students. And I was working with students trying to help them learn English. And a lot of the guidance we would get from principals, from the administration about how to welcome these students, it was always about celebrating their culture, where they come from, celebrating their language, just pretty much celebrate everything about their culture and don't celebrate American culture. And there's, like you said, the word angst. Like, I think there's this weird, it just doesn't make sense to do something like that. Mainly because it's like you're fleeing from another country to come here. And so shouldn't you be dedicating your time to learning about America, learning the language, and appreciating some of the values and the culture that takes place here? But no, it's like that seems bigoted, that seems harsh, that doesn't seem equitable. And if you're a Christian and you have any sort of conservative leanings, to be in that sort of environment is really, it strips you of, like, it's like soul sucking.
Oh.
So I totally get it. Like, and I think multiculturalism promised this utopia. It said, hey, look, we can just all get along because equity is this highest virtue. But like in practice, it just doesn't turn out that way. Like, we're seeing more division between people of different races today than we did in the 90s, and that's where it was beginning, but it wasn't as rampant as it is today. And so how can multiculturalism, when it's been shoved down everybody's throat, all cultures are created equally, we can all just get along, we can just love each other, right? When they forget, like, man's heart is so sinful, right? Like, we have to be reborn. And there's never been more division among the different cultures than there is today. Like, it's getting worse. And I think it's part of it is because of this. Like, like what you said, it's like, the truth is misdefined. And when the truth is misdefined, like, you don't have any stable ground to stand on. And so it's just, I'm just kind of ranting here because I remember it so vividly, like all the DEI trainings, all the school curriculums, all the refugee reception trainings. Like, it's just a bunch of nonsense when people just need truth. People need to assimilate. People need to repent, obviously. Kind of changing gears because I want to be respectful of your time.
Well, you're good.
How did you become a Christian?
Good question. Yeah, so I think there's a sense in which God has been exceedingly gracious to me, and I start by saying that because I think many people will recall a single instance in which the truth became clear to them. And sure, like I can recall a moment in which the truth became very apparent to me in a life shaping sort of way. That said, I was privileged to have grown up in a really good, solid Christian home where the truths of God's word were taught to me from a very young age. I remember being raised on the catechism and being raised memorizing scripture. I'm just developing a real rich biblical literacy, being in church week in, week out, just being around a good community of Christians as well. That was a very big part of my upbringing. And I think that I can actually trace it back to then in terms of God leaving very significant impressions on me regarding who he is, regarding who I was as a sinner in need of redemption, and recognizing that he was also being exceedingly good, gracious, and kind to me, in giving me the family that I grew up in and giving me the church I grew up in and giving me just all this good influence. I had a very strong understanding of good and evil. Evil bothered me. There's a sense in which sin bothered me. I knew that there was something wrong with it. And yet I think for much of my upbringing, these are things I sort of knew, still in a very casual sort of way. Up until I was about 15 or 16 years old, where I think things just really came to a head. I think God just really confronted me in the most compelling way to this point, with the truth of my need for a savior, like my need for Jesus Christ. Not just a need, but that, hey, Jesus Christ has done this for you. He is the Redeemer. If you really want liberty from sin, if you really want to live a life of true meaning and purpose, if you really want to live the way God defines living, then the answer's in him and in him alone. And therefore you must trust him. You must believe in him. You must believe in who he is and what he has done in his redemptive work in order for you to have any of that. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me. And I remember that just being the moment that I just started pursuing the truth and started following the Lord. I hated sin in a new way. I loved righteousness in a new way and wanted to do the things that please God and devoted my life to his service. And so this is all happening in my mid-teens. And in many ways, again, because of the upbringing I had, I think this moment that I'm describing was one in which I began to connect a lot more of the dots of my upbringing than I was able to before. Now I recognize like, that thing I memorized when I was 5 years old, turns out that was some really good stuff. I look back now and I'm thinking, yep, I think God really was dealing with me from the time I was born, from the time I was conceived, laying these significant impressions on me until that moment in which I could say own it for myself, and it's been an incredible journey since then.
Amen. Well, thanks for sharing that. So now you live in Moscow, Idaho, which, if anybody has been paying attention, Moscow has received quite a bit of attention from major outlets, and probably the most prominent one was CNN, where and you actually appeared briefly in some of those interviews. And so I think, I can't remember which anchor came, but they interviewed a bunch of people down in Moscow and did a little piece on Christian nationalism and interviewed Pastor Doug Wilson. But it was it was only like 15 minutes, the whole segment. But I imagine they had probably been recording there all day. So is there anything people missed who only got to see the 15 minutes? Is there any?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so the journalist who had come down to do this story, her name is Pamela Brown. I think we had a little bit of prep beforehand, maybe a week or two, something like that, in terms of just knowing that they were going to be around. And I was invited on to do an interview with them. Yeah, it was interesting. I think the day that I showed up, there was already a rush. In fact, there was we weren't actually sure if if everyone who was supposed to be interviewed would get interviewed. But yeah, I think they made time for it, and we managed to sit down and actually have a conversation. Now, my segment was like literally like 15 seconds long in the final cut. My conversation with them, I'd say, was maybe about 40 minutes long. So it was a full length interview in that sense. And we touched on,
Wow, and they boiled it down to 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Yeah. And the 15 seconds had to do with whether there are other Black people in Moscow, you know, even though we talked about so much more. I think we talked about Western civilization. I was trying to give them some cultural comparisons between civilizations that have been influenced by Christianity in contrast to civilizations that haven't been influenced by Christianity. We talked about patriarchy. We talked about the necessity of pushing the truth and why no one can just live life on their own terms, and do as they please, and why it's important that they do what pleases God. We talked about some of that. And I actually think that all the ethnic stuff around Blackness was literally, I mean, we really didn't camp out on that for very long at all, but that's the part that they put in there. Now, to be fair, I think that as the story came out, on CNN standards, this was their idea of what moderation looks like. Like, this looked like a fair and balanced story. And sure, I give them credit for that. I didn't even in the interview sense an antagonism. I think even off camera, what I witnessed was just good conversation, genuine curiosity. Of course, at the end of the day, they're working on a story, and a story is always going to land a very specific way. And especially if you're talking about things like Christian nationalism, talking about things like patriarchy, they know their viewership. They know what CNN stands on. And so those things in the general cultural ether are going to be frowned on.
Mm-hmm.
But between myself and that journalist, I mean, she was friendly. It was great. The way they edited it was hilarious to me, because it's like, okay, well, this is not exactly how it felt behind the camera, but those are things to be expected as you're going in. Like, you know, okay, this is CNN. This is how they might twist something that you say. And so going in, I was just very intentional about making sure that I was being as clear as possible. Let each one of my sentences stand on their own, so that nothing could be taken out of context. And even when it is, it's easy to sort of explain the context so that people could understand. So yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to kind of see the responses to that piece as well. And yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's some of the background.
Yeah. Is it annoying when everything just comes back to Blackness for you? I remember listening one time to an interview. I can't remember. I think this was a professor at SBTS or maybe the Master's Seminary. I can't remember, but he's a Black professor, and every time he gets invited to go speak somewhere, it's always on the topic of. And so this is even kind of in the Christian realm too. It's always about Black identity. And I remember one time on the interview, he said, and I wish I remembered his name. He goes, you know, I wrote a really great commentary on the book of Ephesians. It's really good. But at the end of the day, I always get asked to speak about being Black.
Right. There's definitely people, only see in color in that sense. Like, they only see ethnic differences, and that's all it amounts to. And so it's easy to become then like the token Black guy who can speak to things. On one hand, I think it does actually provide some opportunities. Like, for example, even like in the build up to the CNN interview, there was a point where they were pressed for time, and they were kind of looking over at who was left for the interview, and they immediately saw me and they asked, wait, is he the guy that we're supposed to be interviewing? And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, no, we'll definitely get him, you know? So that certainly happened. And because of that, you actually have opportunities to speak to things. Something people don't often recognize is Black privilege is a real thing in this modern world. For better or worse, it's a thing. And that gives you an opportunity then to speak into the things. And usually that's what shocks them, is that, you know, you start speaking and they realize like, oh, so he's not peddling the fact that he's perpetually oppressed. Oh, he actually likes Western civilization. Oh, he is actually not a feminist. He's a conservative, you know, like, and so it's a good opportunity to kind of shock people and gives them kind of makes them stumble over their own words and not really know what to say or how to respond. So it does provide an opportunity, and I'm grateful for that. I think the other hand is just kind of what you're mentioning as well, is that sometimes it does get frustrating in the sense that that's all people tend to see. All they tend to see is the blackness and the stereotypes that come with the blackness, which I find
it's hard
interesting.
to, like, and I get it, like race is a major topic today and in
Yeah,
the last 5 years, but the truth should just always be the truth. And I get that there are powerful vehicles to deliver truth, but sometimes I can't help just being an audience member sometimes, like thinking, are we just selectively picking people to affirm what we want to, our convictions, It's like, we're going to pick this black guy to speak because we want the world to see that black people like us. Like,
right,
just to be
exactly.
really, when it's like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just interesting. Obviously, like, the truth is always the truth, and that should be enough. But I understand that we live in a world that's complex, and
sure.
God gives people certain upbringings. It might not even be your skin color. It might just be the way you grew up that resonates with other people. And I understand there's a real power to being able to speak in a way, given your background or a person's background, that resonates with an audience. But there's just a lot of things that I think are cringe sometimes as well.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. And I think in that sense, I mean, like personally, my upbringing was fascinating. We didn't get into this, but I grew up in Pretoria, South Africa. Pretoria is maybe the whitest area in Africa. And yeah, like that's not even hyperbole. That's just true. I moved there in the 90s with my family. I was still young. This is where I grew up. This is where I spent my formative years, and very Afrikaner area as well. And so if I had a second language, it would have been Afrikaans, and that's what I spoke. And so that was a real thing growing up for me. And so I suppose all my life, questions to do with ethnicity, questions to do with culture have always fascinated me. And something I've learned is ethnicity really doesn't have an influence on culture at all, as if our melanin bleeds into culture. And all it boils down to is religion. And so you can have people who have different ethnicities, but if they have the same religion, what's effectively going to happen is they're going to have a very similar culture. And that's something that I've experienced. And I continue to have these kinds of experiences where I've seen that up close. And what you realize is that societies that have actually done really well for themselves, and maybe I don't know how many people in your audience know about it. I mean, today South Africa kind of has a reputation for being rife with all kinds of problems. And it's true, there's many problems there. But South Africa actually has a rich Christian heritage. It has a rich heritage built on Dutch Puritanism. This was in the 16th and 17th century predominantly. So a very similar story to actually the founding of America and the American experiment. And you go to South Africa, and in many ways, it is a first world country. It is a Western country. And that was my upbringing. So I had a very Western upbringing. And it's not so much that the Western or the reason why the civilization became as developed as it was is because of an ethnic reason. It became what it was because of a religious reason. And it's a Christian thing. It's because of its Christian heritage that it prospered. So anyway, I think the story that God has written about me in my life is fascinating. And I've had just an interesting front row seat to conversations about ethnicity and conversations about culture. And I think in many ways, I will not fit in anyone's ordinary boxes. And that's a fun space to be in. But I think it also provides an opportunity to provide some insight that people might never have considered. I don't think typically people meet many people like me. I can't even say that there's too many people like me in that sense. We've had exactly the same kind of story as me. But yeah, I'm grateful for it. And I think God uses it. And also, I mean, just for the record, I actually do have actual Dutch ancestry. And I like to use that to kind of throw people off. And it's like, if you squint really hard, you might be able to see it. And so even just those questions around ethnicity, it's just, yeah, it's fascinating. So people be like, hey, as the black person in the room, Jonah's like, no, 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 I identify as white. Actually, I do have Dutch ancestry, so I don't
Nice.
know what you're talking about, you know. I would have probably given that as an answer on the CNN interview, but I chose to be kind and polite. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah.
Yeah. That whole conversation about culture, I tend to agree that race is subordinate to culture, that it does not necessarily define, like, there's obviously huge correlations, but I always ask myself this question sometimes. If I had to pick my neighbors and I was given the option between a bunch of white redneck hillbillies or a bunch of people like Thomas Sowell and Clarence Thomas, I'm going to go with Thomas Sowell and Clarence Thomas every time because, like, I think we are just more aligned culturally.
That's right.
And they're professing Christians. And I believe our fellowship as neighbors would be a lot more peaceful and conducive to just a peaceful neighborhood.
Mm.
And so that to me is sort of like, okay, it can't always be about race and culture. Right. I think, like, if I were to give like dating advice, like if somebody said like, do you think it's okay to like date outside of your race? I would say yes. But be very cautious about dating outside of your culture. Because when you go outside of your culture, like that's where things can get really difficult. And it's a difficult road. And
yeah.
So Christianity is obviously at the pinnacle, and it's the anchor through which a good culture can become truly prosperous. I like what you were saying about that earlier.
Absolutely.
Well, Lennox, I want to say thank you for your time.
Of course.
You know, this has been a really fun conversation, and best of luck to everything you're doing down in Moscow. And I'm sure we'll meet again in person at some point. But where can people follow you and read some of the things that you write?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Matthew. So it's great to connect with you. You remain in my thoughts and prayers every so often, and so glad we get to remain connected. I think we first met at a Bitcoin conference.
Yep. And I wanted to get into that, but I don't have too much time.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bitcoin, we'll save it for the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation. I give you some context of the necessity of something like Bitcoin in the part of the world that I originate from. But we should have that conversation.
And it would be really cool to just talk about Bitcoin's acceptance in Christianity, and like why some Christians are so resistant to the topic of money and Bitcoin specifically. We'll have to save it for another time, but that'd be a fascinating conversation.
That would be fascinating. But yeah, brother, it's interesting connecting then kind of seeing everything that unfolded with your story. And yeah, I mean, it's been, my heart is burdened for you. And at the same time, I celebrate someone like you just being courageous and standing on principle, and your faith just remaining intact, and you just continuing to press forward and do what you do. So thank you for this, brother. It's actually a privilege for me to be able to stand alongside you today and join you on a conversation like this. So thank you. In terms of places you could find me, if you just look for my name, Lennox Kalifungwa, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, you will find me. I am probably the only one out there. and so it should be pretty easy to find me. But then you can also find me on my Substack, lennoxkalifungwa.substack.com. And then you can watch my shows and podcasts at New St. Andrews College YouTube channel. And yeah, you can find me there.
Lennox, thank you so much. And thank you for the kind words. It really means a lot. Hope you have a great rest of your day, brother.
Take care, brother. God bless you.
Bye.